I'm Tyra Battaglia, President of the Board of Education. I would like to welcome you to January 29th, 2025 special board meeting. We have one item on the agenda. There will be no public participation for this meeting. In keeping with board's commitment to open communications with the community, this meeting is streamed live on CCPS website at www.carrollk12.org and broadcast live on channel 21. We're also recording this meeting so that it can be accessed on demand on our website and broadcast throughout the month on channel 21. As a reminder, please silence all cell phones and other devices. Also, board members, please turn off your microphone when you are not speaking. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You may be seated. May I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Moved by Dr. Dorsey.
I'll second.
And a second by Mr. Whistler. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
It is passed unanimously. And now I will turn over our discussion over to Dr. McCabe.
Thank you. Before we begin this afternoon, I would like to take a moment to share that the month of January is designated as School Board Recognition Month. Our board members work tirelessly to adopt a shared vision and goals for the district and to ensure that our students receive a high-quality education. In addition to participating in many meetings throughout the year, they spend a tremendous amount of time learning and understanding all the aspects of the school system. They are always available and responsive to parents and members of the community who have questions or concerns, are actively involved in community activities, and spend many hours in schools and at extracurricular events. Being a board member is not always an easy task, especially during the challenging times we are facing as a school system. I would like to express my personal appreciation to our board members for their leadership and their dedication. Thank you for your commitment to our school system and for all that you do. Now, for the purpose of this evening, this is one of the important public steps in our annual budget process. This meeting is scheduled so that I can present my proposed FY26 operating budget for your consideration. After this evening, the budget process moves from my level, where I've developed a preliminary proposal, to your level, where you consider that proposal and make any adjustments that you determine by majority. To assist you in that deliberation, there is a public hearing followed by a board work session on February 5th. If you have a different direction for us regarding your budget, we can begin to receive that input this evening and during the work session. At the February 12th board meeting, you may vote on your FY26 budget request to the commissioners or have additional discussion and schedule additional sessions by the end of February. You must adopt a budget request and provide it to the commissioners by March 1st. When we met for the initial budget work session in December, we noted the uncertainty at the state level and suggested an adjusted timeline that led to this special meeting this evening. In hindsight, that was a wise choice because there have been some significant changes at the state level that we need to share this evening. Unfortunately, those state changes are not favorable for our budget outlook. As we present the budget this evening, you will see that we find ourselves in a very challenging position. While we've been in this position before, from FY09 to FY19, it is not a place where any of us would wish to return. The combination of state changes and inflationary impacts leave us in a situation where we need to make reductions to expenditures simply to present you with a balanced plan for FY26. This means reductions with no improvements to the system and no viable way to offer improved employee compensation. Moreover, the changes contained in the governor's budget have consequences for all of the out years as well. So we do not see this year as a one-time scenario. In addition, the challenging decisions we need to make for a balanced FY26 operating budget does not include the significant changes we need to undertake in order to achieve blueprint fiscal compliance. At the January board business meeting, we presented the report of my fiscal compliance work group. At the February 12th business meeting, it is our intention to provide much greater detail on the school and system changes needed to implement that fiscal compliance plan. These changes will include further position changes and reductions well beyond those presented this evening in order to balance the FY26 operating budget. And while these processes are distinct, they each involve difficult decisions that impact schools, employees, and students. It will be important that we all do our best to work through these challenges in the best way possible. We need to have open and transparent discussions with our communities, but we also need to be honest and realistic and help cultivate reasonable expectations with all of our stakeholders. It also requires that we be partners with other elected officials, including our delegation and the commissioners, that we share our challenges and the requirements we face and work with them to best navigate them in the best interest of our schools. We also need to maintain a focus on returning to our priorities at the earliest possible opportunities. There will be many examples, but I'll share one. I do not take lightly, and it causes me tremendous remorse that we find ourselves unable to meet our employee compensation goals and existing contracts. We made those commitments in good faith, and we made those commitments because they are important and vital to the strength of our organization. In the case of our support employees, we asked them to accept their appropriate salary adjustments over a 3-year plan, and they committed to us in good faith on that goal. It unnerves me to be at a place where we cannot honor that commitment next year, and it certainly is not what our employees deserve. I referred to the fact that, unfortunately, what we face in the FY26 operating budget is not somewhere we haven't been before. I have often referenced the years of budget reductions this system underwent from FY09 through FY19 in terms of blueprint fiscal compliance by trying to highlight that because we eliminated over 300 positions in those years, and now we are in a far more challenging situation to meet the blueprint fiscal compliance than many other school systems who did not have to cut that many positions. We simply do not have the same level of system resources as others, and so our challenges start at the school level. That history of prior reductions also greatly matters now that we have to make additional cuts simply to balance the budget. We have already made over $40 million in prior reductions, including over 300 positions and many important programs. That leaves us with very little left to consider for new reductions, and certainly no ideal choices. As you will see tonight and on February 12th, I'll remind you that the only way to save programs and positions is to continue to eliminate in one place in order to save in another place, or to ask the Board of Commissioners for more funding than they already have planned for us and that we had agreed to honor last year. There is much more I'd like to say, and I'm sure that I'll have many thoughts and comments to interject as staff presents tonight and on February 12th. However, I wanted to take some time this evening to not just mention these prior system reductions, but actually frame them to remind all stakeholders of that past and how its effects linger now and inform our work. Therefore, as I turn this over to Mr. O'Neill and Mr. Burke to present my FY26 proposed operating budget, I have assigned them the unfavorable task of capturing those prior reductions and sharing those first. From there, we will move into the proposed budget. We will do our best to answer your questions and your discussion as we go. Mr. O'Neill? No, I don't.
I hear the oh, there we go. Now the mic is really on. Sorry about that. Thank you, Dr. McCabe, and good evening, board members. As Dr. McCabe said, she asked us to sort of take a few moments and work through a synopsis of that history of expenditure reductions that she talked about and has often talked about from fiscal 9 to fiscal 19. And so what we're going to try to do is do it quickly. But instead of just saying it, as Dr. McCabe has diligently done many times, create a visual as sort of an unfortunate reminder, but also to frame this conversation that she just shared about this budget, but also the blueprint fiscal compliance piece, to just sort of reinforce the point that there are no good decisions to be made and no great choices to be had, but many other challenging choices were made in those years. So Mr. Burke and Mr. Sexton and I spent a few evenings going through budget books from times past and trying to itemize what those reductions were. In some of the early years, we weren't necessarily anticipating over a decade of such reductions, so we didn't necessarily try to capture them as if in hindsight we would want to go back and say it was exactly this amount of money. What I can tell you, when I quit counting last night, I can confidently say it was over $40 million of expenditure reductions in those years. And they included reductions to positions. It included elimination or reducing a lot of programs, many that directly benefit students. It included spending reductions in different line items and categories of our budget all over the school system. It ultimately culminated in school closures. The Board of Ed was in a position to close 3 buildings. The decision was made in fiscal 16 for the 17 school year, and in 7 of those years that we're talking about, there was no increase to the salary schedules for employees. There were some years where we could do one-time bonuses, but there were 7 years of no cost of living increase, no step increment. So briefly, what did that look like? We came up with 375.5 full-time positions that were reduced in those budget years, 9 to 19. So Dr. McCabe has been a little conservative when she's been saying 300 over the years, so it was sort of helpful to put it back together. Many of those were teachers because the largest percentage of our workforce is teachers. There was 1 year where, through collective bargaining negotiations with CCA, we did a retirement incentive program for teachers. In that 1 year alone, there were 50 reductions just through that program. Beyond that, generally the board's, well, not generally, the board's directive was in each and every year. Those were all years, or I think all but one of those years were years of declining student enrollment. And so the board's directive to the superintendent at that time was to reduce FTE of teachers only to the level that would maintain the student-teacher ratio from 1 year to the next. So that's how that total was arrived at. Those next 2 line items specifically address positions that used to exist in this building that were reduced, so almost 60 there. There were 12 school administrator FTE reduced. Most of those were assistant principal positions, but not all of them. Secretarial positions, clerks and clerical, 54. That's system-wide, some in this building, others in schools or other departments, and plan operations and maintenance, custodians and maintenance, that was 45 and a half. Some of those were central positions. Some of those were floater custodians that we maintain centrally and try to send to schools as they have staffing shortages and needs. And others were in the schools themselves. And then there were 16 sort of other positions, many of those will sort of show up in the next slide, or some of them will as we talk about programs. And again, this is a synopsis. This is not literally everything. This is just some of the highlights. In the early years, we cut our after-school community learning centers. We used to have an educational foundation designed as a nonprofit designed to support endeavors in the school system. That was a thing that we ultimately reduced and eliminated. Tied to that was a community partnership office. And you know, your strategic plan partnerships are important, but that was an early decision. We used to have a dedicated substance abuse office. We used to have recess monitors in schools. We used to have kindergarten assistants in schools. We used to have positions called crisis counselors. Schools used to operate with a higher allocation of site-based substitutes, and that would have been nice to have had in the pandemic years and the years coming out of pandemics. And then ultimately we closed 3 schools, and I believe the number of FTE associated with that was 55, I think, but I can look that up if you want a specific. Other things we did that we didn't sort of categorize as either positions or programs. We had sort of contingencies built into different parts of the budget to deal with unforeseen situations. One of those was in transportation. If fuel prices spiked in a year, we would have a contingency to address that. We eliminated that. In fiscal 13, we eliminated 40 buses from our contractors' fleet by performing an efficiency plan where basically Mr. Hardesty and his team adjusted the start and end times at all of the schools to allow us to maximize the number of tiers that each bus serves. So that was 40 buses. And this is a good place to pause just for a second. And I know I need to get to the budget, but we make these decisions and they have impact on the school system, and we know that. We also make these decisions that have impact on the community. The 40 buses that we saved from the fleet saved $1.2 million out of our operating budget. That $1.2 million came from our school bus contractors in turn. So those are the kinds of consequences that go along with these kinds of decisions. Similar to the Transportation Stabilization Fund, we used to have money programmed into our operating budget to address maintenance project needs in our schools. These are smaller type things that come up that aren't part of the CIP, the capital budget process with state and local participation. Over a series of years, we reduced all of that money. I think all of you on the board today know that the way we tried to handle that instead was to set up a capital project account to at least still be able to in some way address those projects. We're going to talk about utilities differently as far as an outlook for fiscal 26, but we had many good years in utility rates and usages in those years we're talking about now, and we cut over $1 million in multiple years from our utilities budget. Even though we talk every year about how we structurally do not have the money we need to replace devices, computers and devices, one of those years we actually cut that budget as well. Sometimes when we had position cuts to talk about, like we might later tonight, our employee groups approached us and said, we'd rather work with you bilaterally. We understand you need savings, but instead of you cutting that thing or that job, we would prefer to find a way to get to the savings without cutting the FTE. And so there were times when our case unit in particular stepped forward and through collective bargaining of their own ask, in lieu of cutting FTE, chose to lower the duty year for employee groups. That's a loss of salary, meaning you worked a less day, but you got paid less. You know, that day of pay came out of the compensation. I already mentioned the 7 years without step or COLA mixed in there, and then I mentioned all of we went through every line item in every cost center of the budget and said in any given year we're going to take this out of it. A ton of that was salary savings because like the year we did retirement incentive, for instance, when you have 50 folks who are at the high end of the salary scale retire, you tend not to hire 50 people who are also placed at the highest placement on the salary scale. You hire newer employees, someone maybe a brand new teacher or in the first few years. We would take the differential out of the operating budget into the next year. We were doing all of these things just to do our best to balance the budget year by year. And unfortunately, blueprint coming was one thing, but now we find ourselves tonight when we look at the FY26 budget where we're kind of back to this place again. And so just bear in mind for you, for the public, for anyone, that when we get to a point tonight where we're talking about what the superintendent is offering as reductions to balance the budget, these things were already reduced along the way. And with that, I'll stop and let Mr. Burke get into the budget itself.
Okay, as we begin to look at the proposed fiscal year 26 operating budget, touch briefly on the revenue side. As the superintendent mentioned, the county had built into our local revenues $7.2 million for fiscal year 26. The commitment was made to build this proposed budget within that revenue number. So the budget that we're going over tonight anticipates $7.2 million from the county commissioners in additional funding for fiscal year 26. We'll get to the impacts of the state budget as well, and why it puts pressure, and we'll be looking for ways to save. So on the state side, just a brief overview. We went over some of this at the December meeting. You'll recall we're in year 3 of our transition into the blueprint formula funding, and so the things that impact that funding come into play here, specifically enrollment. We saw our enrollment this fall fairly flat, and so as it moves in the formula to fiscal year 26, it has that, we were counting on some growth there that we were projecting that came in relatively flat, so that was a bit of a hit to our estimate. We did see some of that same enrollment number, though, some increases in some of the blueprint categories, compensatory ed and multilingual learners. As those numbers go up, that triggers some additional blueprint funding, but also some additional spending required on the blueprint side. So you'll recall that we held off on doing our proposed budget until we heard from the governor's budget that was released January 15th. So our outlook from that original December 18th meeting is now updated with what we know from the governor's budget. So a few things happened in that budget. Of course, updates, more current numbers for our enrollment, for our wealth calculations got factored in, so we got a more accurate state aid projection. In addition, some changes were made or proposed at the state level to decrease the state targeted per pupil amount, primarily tied to the phase-in of 60/40, but again, we were projecting that revenue increase. While it doesn't directly impact our revenue, among some other budgetary reductions and difficult decisions at the state level, one was to pass additional portion of state teacher pension costs to counties. It took us a little time to grasp with whether that meant to schools or to counties. We seem to be understanding that that will be a direct charge to the county government. That's about $2.3 million in Carroll County for additional teacher pensions. So, another pressure on the funding coming from the state.
It doesn't, yeah, it's. There you go.
What do I do?
You're there. It went forward.
Lost it. Okay. So again, at that December work session with what we had preliminary estimates, we were anticipating $6.1 million in foundation funding. With the reductions just mentioned, the per pupil and the other updates to the state formula, we're now anticipating about $2.1 million in foundation funding. Foundation funding of course, being our most flexible and usable for choices to be made in how we fund our budget. So there is additional blueprint funding, as I mentioned, about $4.3 million. That's pretty directly tied to additional blueprint programs, so that that doesn't provide us additional flexibility, but there is additional money, continuing to ramp up through blueprint.
So Mr. Burke talked a lot about the foundation, and the foundation is the part of the state funding formula that deals with total enrollment. There's other parts that deal with special populations of students, like special needs students, multilingual learner students, compensatory ed, or free and reduced meal students. But the foundation is the part of the formula that is the state's main part of the formula that for however many students there are in your school system, the state is going to participate in funding the school system based on a per pupil targeted amount. And this slide hopes to put into numerical form the conversation that the superintendent talked about and Mr. Burke just spoke of what changes came at the state level along with the decision to push the teacher time requirements of Blueprint back. So we're sitting in fiscal 25 and we're planning for fiscal 26 budget. And so there in that first column, when we were looking at anticipated revenues in December, we were assuming that those revenues from the state would be based on that targeted per pupil number in fiscal 26 of $9,226. That would have been an increase of $437 per student over the fiscal 25 amount. What has happened in the state budget is that along with the pushing out of the teacher time requirements, the state has also proposed to take a certain amount of the per pupil target out of the funding pattern. The state has attached those numbers in the fourth column, the column that has 163 for fiscal 26, as the theoretical amount of per pupil funding that would be attached to phasing in teacher time, and then it increases as you go into the out years. But what they're saying is if we're going to push the phase in of teacher time out, then we're also going to reduce the theoretical amount of funding associated with it from the per pupil target. So in other words, 9,226 is now 9,226 minus 163 for a new foundation number of 9,063. And that's important because that's the number by which the state determines its participation. They do so, as in all categories, on a wealth equalized basis. Wealthier counties, they fund less. Less wealthy counties, the state participates more, but they've lowered the funding for all school systems by virtue of this decision. And we're here tonight to talk about fiscal 26 and deal with some very challenging aspects of a balanced fiscal 26 budget. But as you can see in that very last column, reducing those numbers for teacher time out changes the amount of increase we would be expecting year by year in state aid to the point that it eventually goes into deficit from what we were reasonably hoping it to be. So this is an FY26 challenge this evening. It's something that we have to be concerned about into the future as well. So hopefully that, as a visual, gives you at least a starting point to wrap your minds around it, or for folks to begin to think through it. But that's the change that in part led to a much lower number of anticipated state revenue.
So to wrap up the revenue side, when we look at our projected state revenue and foundation, the $2.1 million, along with the county planned amount there, our request of 7.2, we come to a total increase in projected revenue of 9.3 million. On the expenditure side, as we updated cost estimates for the new year, had our agency requests and went through and making sure we were funding, all the portions of our budget, we came up with a preliminary expenditure increase totaling 12.9 million. So we're exceeding our revenues, and we'll get to that.
Mr. Burke, hang
yes.
on one moment. I wanted to see if any of the board members had any questions real quick
Sure.
while we're, no? Okay. All right, thank you.
So I think we talked in the December work session, particularly some of the pressures on our budget this year, primarily inflationary. Mr. O'Neill mentioned utilities as we go on to new contracts and adjust to that market rate, inflationary increases there in almost across the board, all of our insurances, including our employee benefits. So nearly 10 million or so there in inflationary costs between the utilities and the insurances. We mentioned the technology devices as we continue to work toward replacement of devices that were put in place. Projected that cost increase in the budget, not the total amount we do, but the increase trying to ramp up, being able to meet those needs as 1.9 million. A few other areas there in special ed and curriculum and just others across basically all aspects of the budget come to our, again, total expected increase there of 12.9 million. So again, that put us into a deficit position. Our projected revenues at 9.3, our projected expenditures at 12.9 million. And so as we look to work toward a balanced budget, to bring a proposed balanced budget, we needed to look at expenditure reductions. And so I believe Mr. O'Neill will walk us through those.
We'll walk through these, and we'll take some time to do so. So here are the reductions that Dr. McCabe is proposing to cover that $3.6 million structural difference between projected revenue and known expenditures. And these are not good choices. And tonight, this budget passes from Dr. McCabe to you, and there are not good choices. And we're going to talk about those themes throughout tonight. These are the not good choices that Dr. McCabe is proposing. I'm actually going to come back to the top one last. I'm going to skip the phase-in utilities increase and address that at the end. In last year's budget, or the budget we're now operating on, the fiscal 25 budget, we had some other choices that we also had to make to get to a place of balance. And one of those decisions brought to you and ultimately into the budget was to back off of the 1-to-1 ratio at grades kindergarten through 2. And on the earlier slide, that structural problem we're looking at for replacing student devices is 1.9 million. During the pandemic, we had little choice, so this isn't a criticism of anyone who made that decision, but when schools were closed physically, federal money came and all school systems put devices in every student's hand. And as we did that, we knew that we did not have a plan and probably didn't have a lot of hope that we were going to get ongoing revenue to replace those devices. Student devices we can buy with a 3-year warranty generally, whereas we can buy a longer warranty on employee devices. And so in the last 2 years, those 3 years are expiring, and we need to replace those devices if we're going to keep them. We had to make a choice last year to not continue that at grades K through 2. This year, the superintendent is proposing to you that we make the choice to not continue the 1-to-1 ratio at grades 3 through 5 as well. This does not mean that students will not have access to computers. It means they will not have a 1-to-1 computer assigned to them. And I might ask Mr. Shockney to tell you what that does mean literally, though.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. Like we did prior to the pandemic at the elementary level, technology, specifically laptops and computers, may have been on carts and were shared by the school. So if the teacher was doing an activity or a lesson that utilized technology, they could sign out the cart, bring that into their classroom, so kind of a shared approach. We transitioned back to that model, as Mr. O'Neill said, in K-2 for this year. In this proposal, we would continue that model in grades 3 to 5 and make that transition back to sharing instructional devices throughout all grades in our elementary schools. And again, not ideal, But it is functional. We did function this way previously, and although difficult, that is a transition that we can transition back to.
Excuse me, Mr. Shelton, I have a question. So what does it look like at the school level? So, like, for every team of third graders, there's just one?
Yeah,
One cart
yes.
of computer?
On average, it's typically, depending upon the size of the building, typically it is a cart of laptops per grade
One
level.
per grade.
Per grade level.
Okay.
That next line item is a reflection of actual expenditures in the curriculum and instruction budget. And largely it associates with, as we have relied more on digital applications or digital curricula, there comes along with that transition different types of costs associated with it, and those costs confront inflation just like utilities do. And so Mr. Wernick in his budget is seeing an increase of $400,000 of actuals in terms of things like site licenses for different tools or applications, service agreements, maintenance agreements, those kinds of things. And so we were trying to plan a budget so that we could fund those things for Mr. Wernick. What we're saying by virtue of this line item is that Mr. Wernick now has some difficult choices of his own to make. He can pay for those things to maintain them if they're now embedded into our schools and our curriculum, but he has to find $400,000 elsewhere in materials, supplies, equipment, et cetera, that he would not renew. That might mean, it could mean many, many things, and Mr. Wernick is way more attuned to his budget and his operation than I am. But just for an example, what that might mean if he were planning on replacing this textbook next year, that textbook wouldn't get replaced until a year after next year to cover those costs. So that's kind of what that looks like. The next item is the transportation reimbursement formula. We do not own our buses, and we do not employ our bus drivers and our bus assistants. They are employed by 30-plus independent bus contractors, as you well know. We reimburse or remunerate those bus contractors through a formula that you approve each year. It's incorporated into your budget, and then you separately approve that formula. We have struggled along with our contractors for many years coming out of the pandemic to deal with the driver shortage and to get buses on the road, and we've done many things with coverage and efficiency, but the boards of ed, those of you who've been here and for those of you who are new, boards of ed before you made some tremendous commitments to improving that formula, and much like your tremendous commitments to employee compensation have in part resulted in stabilizing some staffing, we're now at a really good place compared to where we have been on transportation. But we have to look everywhere to find $3.6 million of expenditure reductions, and so we're proposing that we look at one portion of that formula to some degree. We were hoping to have a budget before you that the salary portion of the formula would offer a 5% increment, or not increment, 5% increase to bus drivers and assistants. We're now making a proposal to reduce that 5% to 3%. And I think it's fair for others, maybe, employee groups to say, well, if Dr. McCabe is talking about no compensation for employees, why any over here? And there's lots of good reasons for that. One is what I've already talked about with where the program's been and where it is today. Another is that historically the pattern has been that the amount of money we offer in the formula to our contractors trails by 1 year the raise that Carroll County Public School employees have received. And for our educational support unit contracts, that was 5% in step. And so that 5% would have aligned with that historical pattern of offering that in the next year to the bus contractors through the formula. We made a decision to stop at reducing it by 2% and drop it from 5 to 3 because many years ago when we were getting to sort of a crisis point with transportation, our contractors sat down with us in good faith and worked out a future look at what the formula might look like so that their businesses could be viable. And we set a mutual goal in that report to set a a floor of 3%, that hopefully every year we could at least do a 3% increase to the salary portion of the formula. So even though this is bad news in general, we're trying to honor at least that and not go below the 3% limit. That's $200,000. And then lastly, or at least the last item here, as Dr. McCabe said, on February 12, we'll be coming back with the fiscal compliance report, and what you're seeing tonight will be added to greatly. This is perhaps an item that might have waited for the February 12 meeting. However, with what has changed at the state level, we're bringing it forward now. We're proposing a reduction of 3.0 full-time equivalent positions of clerical roles in this building. And then that leaves the two I haven't talked about yet. Through all of the years of budget cuts that Dr. McCabe asked us to compile on the earlier slides, these are all the pages from all of those budgets. Outdoor school was always something that was talked about for most of those years. And so I was here, and I am well aware that it is near and dear to many, many people in Carroll County who have students today who attend, or who they themselves might have attended when they were a Carroll County student in 6th grade. Somehow, miraculously, that program managed to survive all of those years. And now we find ourselves at a place where Dr. McCabe is making her proposal that we would have to close the outdoor school. And that money that you see reflected would be 9.8 FTE, would equate to about a 1.1 million. So that's obviously not a light decision, but what else is missing a little bit tonight and won't become fully there until February 12 is the scope of other decisions that are going to have to be made as well as part of Blueprint fiscal compliance. So this is about your next year's budget, and this is about how much money we don't think we're going to get for next year. But also separate but still part of this is what we're going to have to reduce and change in order to come into Blueprint fiscal compliance. So again, this is something that was probably going to be discussed on February 12, if not tonight. In order to get to a balanced number tonight, we're having this conversation. I want to clarify one thing so that everyone's aware. We do not own the outdoor school or its property. That is county property, real estate and county buildings. And so our savings would just be the staff-related savings. It would not be any sort of operational costs associated with a facility. This would be now, we have to, if this were to happen, and we're not there yet, we're not at the end of the budget process, we would need to have a conversation with the county about what that means for them in terms of us not being there every day. And then lastly, I said I'd come back to it at the end. Mr. Burke shared earlier that we're seeing what we believe would be $3.3 million in increased utility expenditures, mostly associated with the newer electrical and natural gas contracts. I think you approved those, was it about 8 months ago? So we've been trying to monitor actuals and projecting out. We have energy consultants, just like we have benefits actuaries and consultants. And so we feel pretty good about the 3.3 number. Not that it's a good number, but we end up at a place where we're still 500,000 from balanced. We spent a lot of time talking to the superintendent. We know that it is not a good idea to use one-time money for ongoing costs. And so suggesting that you use $500,000 of your fund balance to cover some of that increase we're seeing in utilities is not the ideal solution. That being said, your fund balance policy, which is based on some guidance from the Government Accountability Standards Board, earmarks utilities, transportation, fuel costs, and health insurance calls, if you will, as three of the areas where you earmark a portion of your fund balance to cover if need be. What we're suggesting or recommending is that we take 500,000 of the 3.3 million and pay for it with fund balance next year to close this final gap. That gives us another full year of actuals to make sure that 3.3 is the right number. You have a healthy fund balance, which Rob will discuss again later, and so we're making that recommendation as part of this plan tonight. One last comment on the positions that are being proposed to be reduced. I want to say again, we understand this is the beginning of the public budget process, and we're not at the end. So these things theoretically could not happen if the General Assembly changes the governor's budget in a good way, if a lot of things. But if we get to a place either here as part of the budget or later as part of the blueprint compliance where we're reducing FTE, our goal is to not lay off or RIF people, a reduction in force. Our goal would be to find a position that the person is credentialed for somewhere else in the school system. And there's, of course, union procedures that go with that, rightfully so, that all would have to be worked through. So as bad as those years were, I'm not sure that we ever had to reach a point where we did a RIF. And it may be that we did in a very isolated way. We certainly didn't have to in a large-scale way. So we're optimistic that if we make these reductions, it doesn't mean we're putting a person out of employment. However, when we get to February 12 and you see the broader context of what needs to change in order to comply with Blueprint, I'm honestly very worried for the first time that might become a reality. So I would look at these numbers and say I wouldn't be concerned in this amount, but in the bigger picture, there's certainly something to consider and discuss. I'm going to go next to talk about what's not in the budget, but we can flip back and forth if you have questions about these.
Does anybody have any questions?
Well, I just want to make a point of clarification, so to make sure everybody understands that, again, this is just the operating budget.
Yes, ma'am.
That we're referring to tonight.
Yes, ma'am.
So these extra cuts or possibilities that you referred to for February 12th are more in line with what we'd be looking at for the blueprint compliance,
Yeah.
right?
Correct, Dr. Dorsey, and I guess it's the next slide, so we'll get there eventually, and we'll talk about it again, and that'll be fine. This is about running the school system next year and having enough money to pay the bills and run the school system. And there's not improvements here. I'm already on that slide. That blueprint fiscal compliance piece is about how the blueprint law dictates where money gets spent, and most especially at the school level. And so that process is not about future money and how much future money. It is about money already in your budget. And that from our analysis, our schools are not resourced the way the blueprint envisions them being resourced. And so that will mean movement of folks. It could be as simple, and I say simple, it's not simple if you're that person, I understand that, but it could be as simple, I don't have a better word, as simple as this year I teach at this school, but next year I have to teach at that school. But it also will mean things like we presently aren't spending enough money per blueprint in certain ways that we have to spend, but we're spending the money already some other way, and so we have to reduce that way in order to free up the money so that it could be spent over here. So for instance, multilingual learners, ESOL students is one of those places where we are not spending the amount of resource that Blueprint says we must. But we're spending all the money today. So something has to go away over here in order to free up the money so that we can hire the ESOL appropriate resources. It's that kind of activity. It's about reallocating or reproportioning existing funding regardless of how much new money you may or may not get in a year. But unfortunately, it's similar to some of these things that are on the screen tonight for expenditure reductions just to get into the operating budget, just to bring the operating budget into alignment. Am I getting there at all, do you think, or are there better examples or other questions about that?
I just wanted to make
Okay.
sure that everyone was on the same page concerning this being the operating budget.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am. So we talked about revenue and expenditures and being out of balance and what we would propose to reduce to become in balance. That also means there's things not in this budget, and not on a bullet, but to sum it up quick, there are no improvements to Carroll County Public School in this budget. There's no new program. There's no new initiative. There's also no room for employee compensation as we sit here tonight, and Dr. McCabe addressed that very eloquently in her opening remarks. We have 5 unions, we have 5 union contracts. We do have open negotiations on salary with 2 of those unions, so that's already in the window, that's already available to us. But we have 3 contracts that would be entering their 3rd and final year that were closed contracts from cover to cover, and that included salary. We had agreed with CASE, with AFSCME, and with Food Services 3 years ago that we would try to bring them a requisite salary increase that we thought the blueprint would bring to other bargaining units, and we asked them to commit to us over 3 years to get there. We knew the blueprint timelines for other units, and so we said to them, we would like to give you the raise that you're worthy of too, a similar kind of percentage increase, but we can't do it all at once. And so we're asking you to have faith in us that if you sign this contract with us, we can deliver it over 3 years. That would be the value of a 5% cost of living increase in a step increment to the employees who are covered by the AFSCME CASE and Food Services agreement. And what we're saying tonight is we do not have the money to honor those agreements, and that's that's a little bit painful to sit here and acknowledge. But that's our reality, at least for this evening. What that does mean is that we would have to enter into a legal process of renegotiations, that Mr. O'Mealy, as your chief negotiator, will have to reach out to those units to say, in good faith, we need to inform you that right now we don't see a way that we can fund that 3rd year of the contract, and we have an obligation, a legal obligation, if not a moral one, to invite you to engage with us to look at other solutions. We know that the budget process really kind of begins tonight and doesn't conclude tonight. Those unions will have to make a choice as to whether they're ready right now to engage or whether they want to see where it goes for a bit. But we have the obligation to make the ask. These are settled contracts, so I don't feel like I'm speaking outside of the rules of negotiations. If you want to assign a dollar value to that, it's about $3 million. We would have needed $3 million in additional revenue to fund those contracts. Mr. O'Mealy, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you've covered it. It's just that there is a prescribed process for renegotiations as set forth in the education article. We will follow that process, and we will meet with the 5 units in good faith and try to reach the agreements that we need to make.
Thank you. Other things not included. Is that on? Yeah. Other things not included are any additional blueprint requirements. We talked about the state pushed back teacher time. It didn't push back other things. We're not able to further expand pre-K. We're still catching up to the expansion we've done in the last couple of years, utilizing the state expansion grant. But when we utilize the state expansion grant, we then have to pay for it the next year ourselves. So we're not able to do more pre-K growth. Dual enrollment, there's actually been some more recent developments with the AIB where there's some guardrails in place for that now. So Mr. Shockney's been working at the college to try to reform our memorandum of understanding around the most recent understanding, but there's no money in here to cover what at the moment are higher costs than the year before. Same thing with advanced placement program growth. Blueprint requires that we pay for the program and the tests. That's an area where structurally, we have more expenditures than we do revenue. We're just going to have to figure out how to cover that by year end. And then, Dr. Dorsey, back to your point, part of this blueprint fiscal compliance is moving teachers from here to there, and there may improve class sizes. More teachers there will bring more resources to students, but the schools from where teachers left will have fewer resources and therefore most likely increased projected class sizes. Mr. Shockney will be presenting on that in detail on February 12. There are no positions in this budget to try to help with that or to mitigate with that, or there's no money for positions to do that. I've talked till I can't anymore about 3 areas of our budget that are extraordinarily important to me that continue to operate basically in a bad structural position, and that's technology, security, and maintenance. We talked earlier about how we stripped those funds out of the budget many years ago. Even before we did one-to-one devices, we never had enough budgeted money to replace adult or employee devices. That continues 15 years later. We built out a lot of security infrastructure, and rightfully so. Much like adding student devices, though, those grants and those additional one-time funds to add whatever don't come with ongoing revenue to replace those cameras or to replace those parts of the network that support that infrastructure of security. And then Mr. Prokop operates now out of your capital budget. That's how he does those little maintenance projects that don't arise to the big projects in your capital improvement plan. There's once again, for what will be my 15th consecutive year, nothing in this budget to address those system needs. And then there are plenty of people in this organization who have very legitimate requests for additional things that will help support our schools and help support our students, who make those, we still take those requests and consider them as we go through the early stages of their budget development. There's, like I said, there's no improvement in this budget. There's nothing being added to any of the cost centers except to pay the actual bills.
We know with Blueprint that resources are going to be moved towards English language learners, compensatory ed, special education, and so forth. And then I see up there AP program growth. Is there somehow this working against as we move these resources to those areas? Is that going to increase then a deficit with the AP program plus an expectation for program growth?
Essentially, yes. There are competing interests within the Blueprint, and to be able to fund everything is going to be very difficult. To be able to do that, we've said openly previously that the scope and variety of the courses that we offer at our secondary level will look different in the future as a result of shifting staff and resources from some schools to other schools. We're very much actively working on that in preparation for the February 12th meeting. We'll have a clearer picture that we'll be able to communicate to the community then, but most definitely that's a great example of competing interest within the Blueprint.
I don't know if we need to do that at this point. The next slide was going to be that conversation, and you've sort of covered this conversation. This coming up on February 12th, it will be the follow-up to the report that Mr. Shockney and I provided at the January board meeting. It'll be the details of what that means, the numbers of positions we're talking about moving, reducing, changing. And then also Mr. Shockney will have an analysis of what that would mean in terms of school-by-school staffing amounts, and then therefore from there projected class size ranges, I guess, sort of what
we plan to show what we anticipate or project to be some ranges within schools, and then also averages as a result of that, to give you and the community a greater perspective of as what we predict it will look like.
So stay tuned for that. We started with the 9 or 10 fiscal years, or I guess 11 fiscal years of reductions. We also wanted to provide some other detail because having been through those years, we know the kinds of conversation you're going to encounter at hearings and meetings, and we understand people don't read our budget they're not invested in like we have to be in terms of the work. And so lots of folks, there's going to be a lot of feedback of things like, well, just close central office or just do this. And oftentimes we also get feedback like, we're cutting things, and sometimes feedback will be, what you should be doing is this great program that exists in this other school system. And so, we wanted to provide some other context from a statewide lens to say, I forgot how Dr. McCabe said it earlier, but there needs to be an honest and reasonable conversation about what our horizon looks like. These are two reports, the same report from last year and then updated this year for fiscal 25 data from the Department of Legislative Services, which is the independent analyst body that serves the members of the General Assembly. So what they do is they take all school system funding and put it on a per pupil basis and show it by the state per pupil amount and the local per pupil amount, and then they rank those amounts. And so, we're last this year, and I knew that if I showed that, somebody would email me and say, well, you picked a year where you're last, so I put last year's in as well. We're not always last, but we're typically, last year we were 22nd, so we were 2 from last. This year we're 24th, so we are last. This is also our reality, and this is not a blame of anybody. This is to have that conversation honestly and reasonably, like Dr. McCabe would say. So if you were to say, you're doing something wrong in Carroll County, you should be doing this program that exists in Howard County. They're even wealthier than you. You can tell they're relatively wealthier than us because the state actually participates at a lesser value in Howard County. But on the other column, they have more funding than we do to do whatever that thing is that I'm sure is great, that I'm sure is fantastic, but that folks would like to be done here. So,
I would just add to that, as a school system, we've always been able to hang in there with our achievement levels, usually coming in the top 3. And we've done that since FY09 by cutting every year, cutting resources. There comes a point where, it's the straw that breaks the camel's back. And I'm not saying we're there. I'm saying we're at a place where our fiscal reality is going to be affecting students in the classroom, our staff, and our families. And we just have to be transparent about that and realistic about what we can accomplish.
You stole my point and said it more eloquently than I ever would have. There comes a time when maybe we can't continue to deliver at the same level, and this is also part of our reality. And I think Rob monetized it for me, and you correct me if I'm wrong. I think for every $100 change in that number would reflect $2.5 million in funding. So that's if you want to say, well, why don't you have whatever Pick a County has, do the math, and money's not everything. Our results prove that. Money's not everything. But at a certain point, it's hard to continue. It's hard to continue at the same level. So another thing, I think I started with this when I had my slides out of order. It's and I get it, and it's fine, and it's okay. Cut half a central office. You could live without it, and I get the sentiment. Legally, that's a struggle, first of all, because there are people who have to exist here to do something required by state law or regulation. And secondly, the highest number of those position reductions was teachers. But if you saw those groups on that first slide as a percentage of our workforce, we stayed as far from the classroom as we possibly could in those years. Disproportionately, we cut other places, including central office. And this isn't a speech about us. It's more than that, and I'll try to show it in a minute. I'm going to ask Ms. Bowers if she can flip from the slides to a chart. In all of those years of reductions, to try to continue to meet that level of performance, we've tried to preserve the schools. And I think we've done a fairly decent job. What you see on the screen is my analysis of data that's that's sourced to MSDE. It's not my data. It's the Maryland State Department of Ed's data. Regrettably, the most recent data they have available is from October of 23. They haven't yet produced an October of 24 data set. When they do, I'll update this. But what I've done is I've taken the categories of employees the way the State Department of Ed groups them in their report, and then attached that to an employee-student ratio. And what you see is that we rank 13th, and the higher the rank, the better, so to speak, on this chart. We rank 13th in the state on instructional staff. That's mainly teachers, counselors, those kinds of related roles. And sure, we'd love to be higher, but we've managed to stay at about the same place through all of those years by cutting as little as we possibly could get by with out of the classroom. And that's a good thing. We'd like to be higher, but that's pretty close to where we rank in relative wealth. The second column, and there's symbols at the bottom as to what those things mean. That's your non-instructional support. So you hear non-instructional, you might think, well, that's your maintenance work. That's not what this is. This is non-instructional roles serving schools. We rank dead last in the state. Those are roles like principals and APs, I think, but also roles we don't have in Carroll County that others might have, like academic deans or teacher mentors, or a volume of instructional specialists that we don't have necessarily at the same level in Carroll County. So we're last in that category. The third category would be what we would tend to nowadays call instructional support professionals. So that's the CASE employees and the AFSCME employees and the food services employees. We're better at 17th, but we're not great. We'd love to be better than that, but we're a little bit better. And then sort of that last category would be the central office. I think people talk about, folks like me. We're next to the bottom of the ranking, and we tend to be 23rd, 24th. I do this every year and have done it for a long time. It used to be that we battled with Garrett County to be 24th in the state. Now Kent County has emerged and surpassed all of us. Kent County is a school system of, I would guess, 2,000 students. They have one person that falls into that category, but this is on a ratio basis. So this is about, we're showing this to say there really aren't great places to go to find millions of dollars. Those were taken years and years ago. You're confronted now with very challenging choices in front of you between now and when you adopt your budget request, compounded immensely on February 12th by the blueprint fiscal compliance process.
And I would just add to that, folks who watch this may be thinking when they look at the programs or resources that we chose to say were cuts in this presentation tonight, they may be tempted to say, well, I have another idea. We could cut X or Y or Z, something that we didn't put up there. And of course, we are always very much open to any ideas that people may have that we haven't thought about. However, I'll say that on February 12th, we're going to present a whole host of more programs and positions that will have to be cut in order to meet our blueprint fiscal compliance. So, folks who are out there who have ideas about cuts, we may have already thought about that cut, but we're saving that for February 12th so that we can use that to be in blueprint compliance.
Yeah. And in a second, give me a second, Brenda, but in a second I'm going to ask Ms. Bowers to return to the PowerPoint. We want to talk about fund balance. And before she does that, I want to draw your attention back to that second grouping, non-instructional staff. That's your instructional specialists, your mentors. We have, as you know, as part of fund balance assignment, $1 million to try to get a partnership off of the ground with Towson University to provide some much needed mentoring support to our new teachers. to me, those are the ways we've continued to try to be innovative and still perform as well as we can. That's not money it's not ongoing money. It's not competing with other things in the budget. The goal is to get it established next year and look for grant funding that sustains it into the future. And I love to give credit where credit's due, and I mean that. That's also it's a partnership between CCPS and Towson University, and specifically Dr. Nancy Grasmick, the presidential scholar there. But it is also a program supported by the Accountability and Implementation Board. They're providing us very needed support through their strategic facilitator process. In our case, it's a guy named Dr. Frank Grossman to get that thing running. So we know these things, and then we try to make other decisions to still address needs. And so that's just one example that maybe ties in here. Can you go back? I think we're going to conclude tonight with just the update on fund balance, and then we'll be here for questions or any discussion.
So just to give an update on the status of our fund balance, I think I ran through it briefly at a prior meeting, but we finished our fiscal year 24, so June 30th, with $18.1 million in fund balance, about 4.5% of our budget. Generally try to kind of measure that in terms of percent of budget. You'll recall earlier in the fall, the board acted to assign $6 million of fund balance toward specific programs in our fiscal year 26 budget, so that's already captured in. This proposed budget assigns another $600,000. I'll run through that on the next slide. And so where we stand after what's in the proposed budget would leave fund balance in about $11.5 million, about 2.7% of our budget as unassigned. That's fairly historically average for us. I would describe that as a healthy fund balance position to be in. And so we mentioned the board policy, sort of that range that we look at from basically a 1% minimum, which captures some of those available uses that were mentioned, up to a cap with the county, an agreed upon cap of 5%, which would be in the range of $21 million. So we're going to end up the year right about midpoint of the range there. So I mentioned the $6.6 million in identified uses. The first is the Winchester building, which is this building, central office. So without going through too much history, now that that the school board owns this building and is relatively stable in our position to stay in this building for the long term. This building had some needs with its HVAC systems and roof repairs needed. So the advantage of using the fund balance here is it really won't, it's not competing with school level projects. We're able to do it out of fund balance rather than weigh it against a long list of school capital projects that could be used. So we're able to do this locally without competing there. Mr. O'Neill mentioned the Towson University and Dr. Grasmick teacher induction program. That'll get it off the ground. $1 million identified there. We mentioned during our plan to close our gap the use of $500,000 in fund balance to phase in some utility increase. Again, an allowable use of our fund balance. The one place here where we have some ongoing budget there for utilities, using some one-time funding, not ideal, but at that scope, something we think is a reasonable plan moving forward. And the last was a multi-year phase-in of some costs in transportation. So fund balance has been used over the last couple of years, winding down. I believe this is the final year. This is just the proposed budget at this point. These are identified needs. Between now and the final adoption in May, if we will have a chance to project where we see year end for fiscal year '25, and also to identify any potential one-time needs in some of these other areas of infrastructure that we've talked about. And so we could come back with some additional use. If so, that would be a net use of fund balance and an identified need. It really wouldn't change our position in structural deficit. So I'll end just with a look forward here. Obviously, this is the start of a process, a lot of steps to go. We have the scheduled public hearing to be followed by a board work session on February 5th at 6 p.m. in this room. Following that will be the next board meeting in February. Again, based on feedback from tonight and from the work session and public hearing on the 5th, we'll be in a position to understand, does the board want to work toward adoption on the 12th, or to have additional discussion, additional, ideas, whatever that might be. If so, we would work toward adoption later in February. We've got a hold on calendars for February 26th, if that's necessary. Again, working toward adopting the proposed budget in order to forward to the county by March 1st. Then, of course, we'll have communications with the county, their agency hearings, their public hearing in early May, other opportunities to address them. We have a tentatively scheduled board work session to try to pull things back together in early May and generally work toward a final adoption at the May board meeting, May 14th. We'll see where we are then. If we need to make any adjustments as we get toward the end, we've got a little bit of wiggle room there, but not a tremendous amount. We're getting to the point where we'll need to adopt that final budget leading into June. So that's what's upcoming. Questions there? And if not, I think we're
Board members, does anyone have any questions or comments? Start go down. Okay, go ahead, Dr. Mavo.
I appreciate the proposal with Towson University, and I think that's great. I imagine we're still going to look to the local businesses and groups for internships, service hours, and so forth, and try to generate funds through that, right?
Well, yes, we're always looking for opportunities for internships, apprenticeships for our students. That wouldn't generate revenue in that process, if I'm understanding your question correctly, and I may not be.
I guess then I'm trying to figure out in terms of then how the Towson University partnership, how that would be advantageous then.
So that partnership is going to be working. We're building out a program to support our newest teachers and our newest hires. Our current structures provide for us to provide some supports in the initial year that we hire a teacher, but the goal is to develop a robust program that supports teachers in those first 3 years and provides lots of professional learning, coaching, modeling, and support to help us, as a teacher comes on board, obviously, they have their knowledge from their program or that they just finished. However, turning that into operational knowledge requires ongoing support. So the whole goal of that program is to help us retain our new hires, as well as train and build the capacity of our newest of teachers in a time where the needs of our kids are growing and adapting and evolving.
And we used to have a professional development department with people who could do things.
Yeah.
Now, we don't have that anymore. That went by the wayside during all of the cuts that Mr. O'Neill went through with you on those slides. So now we're not able to provide the kind of support and development that we once were. And in a time where we're trying to retain the talent that we can recruit, it's even more important. And so, this is a startup cost, and it will be grant funded. So we won't continue to carry the cost of that.
Dr. Malvo, just to elaborate a little bit more, we're going to build a program and build a curriculum that in a sense doesn't really exist right now, and a framework for what we want our teachers to know and be able to do in those first couple of years of teaching. But another big benefit of the program will be people. Will be staff that Towson is able to provide for us, that will be working with our teachers beyond what we have, the very limited. We just do not have the capacity or the resources as it stands. There was a time long ago, and as we articulated the changes and the cuts that we've made over those 10 years, that was one of, we had more of this support, but we don't anymore. But it's very, very necessary for our newest teachers.
Also driven with some urgency by the changing nature of our workforce during and after the pandemic years. A lot of retirements, a lot of new teachers, and a lot of, for us, an increased percentage of new teachers who are pre-professionally certified, not fully certified. So, as Dr. McCabe talked about, struggling to maintain our standard in the face of all of these things we've shared, we're also trying to maintain our performance with a different workforce of teachers than we once had, and we don't have the level of teacher mentoring that another larger system might have. And so this was a way to form a blueprint partnership with Towson, and to get commitment from Dr. Nancy Grasmick and also from Dr. Ginsberg, the president of Towson, to say, we'll partner with you to get it started, and we'll co-sign grant applications with you to sustain it until such time as maybe the blueprint, if we ever get to full career ladder implementation, all of that would be embedded into the school system anyway. So that's where that came from.
Thank you, gentlemen. Great presentation. It really tees up what we're facing this this year. I had a question. Currently walking its way through the legislature is a proposal to walk back the comp ed rate from 75% spent at the school to maybe 50, realistically probably 60. I know we don't have those details now. We won't know until probably March, but if that were to happen, where we were able to lower that comp ed rate from 75 to say 60, would that give us the flexibility to kind of fill that $3.6 million hole we face?
I can't equate it to that amount tonight, but it would certainly free up some flexibility, a tremendous amount of flexibility. And just to be clear, and I know you would say this too, but just to be clear, none of us are saying that compensatory ed students do not need and deserve the additional resources.
I'm not saying that at all.
I know that.
Yeah.
But Blueprint was conceived some years ago and then enacted into law, and it probably does merit, were all of the targets correct? Why is $163, for instance, to earlier tonight, the magical amount that equates to teacher time? Why is the percentage attached to comp ed exactly right? I think that bill aims at re-examining those sorts of things, but freeing up the restrictions then gives us flexibility. I couldn't tell you if that percentage in particular would free up the amount needed to cover that gap, but in some ways Mr. Burke shared this, and Dr. McCabe might have said something like it earlier. On the whole, we're receiving enough state aid to not be cutting $3.6 million tonight. We're just restricted in our ability to use some of that state aid in a way that would prevent us from cutting $3.6 million tonight. And I can't, I want to be careful because I'd have to really look. We might be receiving enough state aid tonight to not cut $3.6 million and fund those 3 bargaining agreements. And I'm not sure of that, but we'd be closer.
Right.
But we're not allowed to spend that money freely. And that doesn't mean that any of us sitting here don't want to provide more and needed services to special populations of our students. We do. But Could we re-examine if all of the parts of the formula are correct, and would that be beneficial? Yes. We didn't hesitate to spend $11.3 million in new state compensatory ed money in the schools where they would want us to spend it. Nick and his team worked around the clock to bring resources into 16 of our schools. We're not opposed to the intent of Blueprint in most cases.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, and I'm glad you said that. I also appreciate you giving us the history of cuts over the last several years, 9 years. And I can just hear the critics now. If you hadn't cut all that, we wouldn't be in this mess. And my pushback to those, I'm very proud of our previous boards of education and our commissioners, and frankly, our superintendents and our staff for doing what they did with what they had. Because and a slide you showed, 24th in this category, we are one of the most leanest and efficient school systems in the state, especially when you consider we routinely score second or third in science, math, and ELA. Our teachers do a phenomenal job, our parents do a phenomenal job, and our students do a great job doing with what they have, what they're doing. So this budget reflects a 2.25% increase. And I want the public to understand that's a 2.25% increase, but yet you see all the cuts and the recommended cuts that are being proposed. It's not because we're not getting more money. It is precisely what you just characterized, John, and that we are not being allowed to spend the funds where we think we need to spend them best. The restrictive elements of Blueprint are causing all of this. Potential renegotiations with employee groups is extremely troubling. Dr. McCabe, I think we're all in agreement on that. Our teachers deserve what they deserve, and they work so hard to get with what they have. But these cuts are not caused by historic costs, but because of Blueprint funding mandates, where we have to spend the money. We talked a lot about foundation and base. I really urge the public to talk to their legislators in Annapolis. The figures you saw in one of the slides are derived from House Bill 504 and Senate Bill 429. Those bills cut the base foundation funding, which is our flexible account. Instead of decreasing those amounts, they should be increasing those amounts and taking funds away from the other mandatory buckets. Buckets used for multi-language learners, buckets used for special ed, comp ed, buckets used for special ed students. And again, to echo what you said, John, it's not that we don't want to support those students and help those students, but we are facing huge cuts in this county for services to our students because of those mandatory spending buckets. And we at the local level need flexibility. So again, House Bill 504 and 429. We need the General Assembly to look at decreasing the mandatory comp ed spending from 75% to maybe 60%. We need them to look at probably eliminating the unrealistic pre-K Blueprint mandates. All of these mandates are forcing us to spend money in areas, and the cuts you saw earlier are because of that. Not because we're getting less money, but because we're being told to spend our money in a certain way. With regards to the technology scale back of 3 through 5, I would urge my colleagues to think about over the next few weeks, several weeks, that we extend that scale back to maybe 6 through 9 as well. It's grades 6 through 8, having carts in our middle schools instead of a 1-to-1 ratio. And maybe considering placing extra carts in that Title I school, or those schools I think are Tier 5. We've had a conversation about our schools being certain tiers based on comp ed, but perhaps putting an extra cart in those schools that where our students need the most. Not a big fan of seeing us use foundation to fill the gaps in these cuts. And with regards to outdoor school, Is there a way that we could figure in and consider field trips for schools to use the outdoor school on a daily basis rather than eliminating it altogether? We may have to eliminate the staff there, but at least have the ability for kids to take field trips there and to learn the environmental things. But and then our bus drivers, it really troubles me to see us considering possibly going from 5% down to 3%, because our bus drivers, we can't find them. They're hard to find. So, colleagues, we have a lot of work ahead of us over the next month, and but whatever happens, we will get it done.
Thank you, Mr. Whistler. And just to respond to your outdoor school question, that's something that we can look into, having it be a place that our teachers can take students for field trips. We'll look into how much that might cost, and also look at the fact, how many staff or employees would we need to have out there to make it a place where our schools could still take students. So we will look into that and get an answer back for the board.
And Mr. Whistler, you I think you asked your board members to consider other changes at the 1-to-1 device ratio, and you may have said through grade 9. So I'd have to get some more detail on that. What I can tell you is that generally on a 3 grade at a time increment, so not quite to 9, it's about $1 million for every 3 grades. Yeah, 6 through 8. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, there would be. I just don't know adding the 9th what that would mean, but so 6 or 8 would be about $1 million. Yeah.
And, well, I appreciate your comments, Steve. And again, when you talk about, considering, again, that 75%, the combat rate, we don't want anything to come back to bite us, so to speak. I mean, because with decreasing or changing the 60 to 40, they took away the funding that we would have received, right? So I'm just wondering, as they look at this other possibility, what impact that would have as well. I appreciate the presentation tonight. I think it's been a hard presentation to deliver, a hard presentation to hear. I think you've all worked hard just showing us the reality of things. And, it's not good. And again, I think when we talk about our students' achievement and their academic success, well, in the past, even with that decade of all the cuts, we really tried to honor classroom instruction. We tried to stay away from items that would take away from instruction closest to the students. So I think that was helpful, and it's probably why we continue to achieve quite well in most of the academic areas. But again, what we have tonight, I mean, it's hard for us to digest, and again, I know as we move forward, we are going to have to make some tough choices, some tough decisions. We respect all of our bargaining units, and we appreciate what everybody brings to the table. So again, it's going to be hard to show them that we appreciate them without being able to move forward to honor what we'd like to honor with them. So I won't say any more at this point, but again, it's a lot to digest, and we certainly look forward to comments that we're going to be receiving from the public, and we can look at how we might move forward together in a positive way. But again, it's a little hard receiving it all tonight.
Okay. Any other comments, board members? Okay. I do have, just a few things. This is a very difficult time for all of us. For staff, for administrators, for teachers, for students, for families, and for our communities. Honestly, no matter who would have taken the seats on this dais, they would have been having to deal with blueprint and funding and the unfunded mandates that we have to put into place. There are lots of challenges. It's the law. A law that at one time Governor Hogan had said no. There was, at the time, the planning and the proposal that many in this very county said it was not good financial decision. And there was many up here that even said it was not good practice. Many of us were blowing the whistle and waving the warning flags. And again, this is yet another unfunded mandate by the state, something we have said over and over again. The previous superintendent openly discussed the difficulties. Dr. McCabe, you have openly discussed the difficulties. All of us have openly discussed the difficulties. There has been a lot of work and time put into making sure we are following the law, making changes, what seems like every other day, and trying to keep up with them. I am going to ask the public to please contact our delegation. They have actually been very supportive and advocates for us down in Annapolis, but please let them know too that, continue advocating for us. I ask the public, contact the current governor, contact the State Board of Ed, contact the AIB, and voice your concerns regarding these mandates that are required to do and how it will affect our students and their achievements. Our voices here on the board, and for Dr. McCabe, they're not enough. We have talked, I think we're blue in the face, but we need the public's help on this. We really do. And again, we do understand how this is going to affect our students and our communities and our students' academic achievements. And I thank you guys for everything you have done over the many years. And like I said, it's been changing over and over again for decades. I mean, for years, sorry. Even COVID too.
And can I just add one more thing?
Sure.
Again, as I open my booklet, I again see the operating budget summary that Carrie's office prepared. So again, thank you for preparing this snapshot or summary view of the budget. That'll be helpful for the community as well.
Okay. All right. Wednesday, February 5th, 2025 at 6 p.m., we will have the operating budget FY26 hearing, followed by a work session here in the boardroom at 125 North Court Street. And at 4 p.m. on Wednesday, February 12th, 2025, the Board of Education meeting will be had with public participation here in the boardroom at 125 North Court Street in Westminster as well. Do I have a motion to close the meeting? Dr. Malvo, and a second?
I'll second.
And a second by Mr. Whistler. All those in favor?
Aye.
Have a good evening. Thank you.